thanks for dropping in today to Collie Talk again. And today we are here with Janice Graham, who's a licensed therapist, and what she is to me is an incredible friend and an expert on codependency, which I've talked about a little bit in the first episode. And I said it's going to be very much a recurring theme in this podcast because it underlines so much of the issues that we deal with in recovery. So Janice, why don't you tell us what codependency is?
Right. It's a broad term. And for me, I spent a lot of years trying to understand codependency, which was the most important thing for me because there's lots of different definitions of it. Mm-hmm. And I synthesized it for me personally and recognized it was a lack of self. It's like the lost self. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so all the different components of codependency expand from that mm-hmm. and develop from that mm-hmm, mm-hmm. of not having a sense of self. And most people think codependency is relationships.
Right.
Disordered relationships, but that's the byproduct of the lack of self. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And because of the lack of self, we're longing. And this is my version, we reach out here to try to feel that longing, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and it's insatiable. Mm-hmm. So it's always driving us to perform better, to get in a relationship, to make more money. All of those outward things we feel and think are going to satiate that.
Right.
And it never does
mm-hmm.
because it's momentary,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And just sort of jumping to something that we talk about very specifically here, you work a lot with women in recovery.
I do.
How does codependency underline a lot of the issues that we face in recovery?
Yeah, it's all the women that come through the center where I VKM mm-hmm. Have a lost self. They do, in the sense that they're struggling. They don't know how to connect. They don't know how to self-soothe. They don't know how to comfort themselves. They don't know what love is. They don't trust themselves. So all of those are components of codependency. So when they come in, that's the core, not the substances or the other disorders. Mm-hmm. It's that they don't have access to themselves. And so I run groups about codependency, but really it's healing trauma. And the core is the trauma. You know, I believe, honestly, the first trauma is birth. I do. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's very distressing. And because we don't know how to caretake and help soothe and comfort our infants the way they need, mm-hmm. so the distress follows us. And then that perpetuates the longing and the core wound mm-hmm. because mm-hmm. nobody's addressing it.
Right. And I think that a lot of people, when you talk about trauma, would think that they don't have any trauma in their lives. There's very clear, instances of trauma, sexual abuse, things that happen. But a lot of people are like, no, I'm not traumatized in my life.
And they use comparison.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say, oh my God, that poor woman's had so much trauma and abuse. Not me.
Right.
Okay, so the hidden trauma, which all of us have, which we don't recognize, is neglect. Mm-hmm. That's the most pervasive, and it's not one you can see or experience because we are in denial and haven't even honored or recognized we were neglected.
Mm-hmm. And like you've said this to me before, and I'm like, but I had great parents.
Right.
I wasn't neglected at all. Everything was perfect.
Right, exactly. And that's part of codependency because we want to protect our parents because that's what we've done our whole lives is try to protect our parents because they were necessary for our survival. So we couldn't, until we get older, understand that they were a part of it. And we have to recognize that neglect doesn't mean they didn't feed us it means that we didn't get our needs met emotionally, psychologically. You know, the core, the nurturing, the cooing, the ability to have our feelings and experience our feelings and understand our feelings, because our parents didn't get that.
Right.
So it's generational. It's not a blame of parents at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that they are passing down their trauma that happened to them.
Right.
And the neglect, I mean, it sounds like, oh, I was never neglected, but if you didn't get what you needed, that is neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, definitely.
And a lot of lack of getting enough nurturing, getting enough attention, getting enough loving, getting enough safety and security, all those are parts of neglect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Definitely.
So it sounds like a harsh word,
Mm-hmm.
but if you really look at it, that's how we learn to do it for ourselves if we understand we didn't get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and again, it's not because parents intentionally did whether they did or didn't, but they don't mean to. I don't think most parents do at all. They just don't have the tools or the experience or the exposure either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know.
Is there something in your life growing up as a child or growing up that led you to follow this path of codependency?
That's a good question. Many things, but the first trauma that I actually had to recover from was when I was 2 months old. My sister contracted polio, and my mom had to leave and go be with her at a facility because she was in the iron lung.
Wow.
And so I was abandoned,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and my 17-year-old sister was taking care of me, my 3-year-old brother, my 7-year-old brother, and nobody would come to our house because they didn't know how polio was transmitted.
Wow. Wow.
So that was the first.
Uh-huh.
And that took a while to uncover because I didn't know I was impacted by abandonment issues until I started experiencing it as an adult. So that's one.
Right, right. Well, you talk a lot about, let's talk about, you talk about how you're codependent very much growing up in life, how we all are. Doing this work, I'm sure you're not totally free of codependency, but how are some of the ways that you've been able to apply this in codependent situations in your life that are better now because of this?
Mostly it's awareness. You know, I've done a lot of work with mindfulness. You know this, but I'll share it. Pause is my favorite word because it allows me to be mindful all day long by taking the pause. And it also helps me recognize when I'm out of alignment with myself. I check in with myself. I use pause as my mindfulness all day long. And it helps me stay connected to myself because codependency is not connected to yourself. And the more I am connected, the less codependent impacts me. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And that is why codependency is so tied to addiction, right?
Yes.
Denial of what's going on with you, not wanting to sit with what's going on with you. I had never heard of codependency before I started recovery.
Right.
At all. I had no idea what it was. And what got me to VKM was the drinking, and I was, just trying to erase myself. I didn't want to think about it. How I dealt with my family was very codependent, especially my children, because I felt like I was doing everything for them. I was the perfect mother, didn't have time for myself, very much a martyr. And so then I would drink because I thought that's my time for myself.
Right.
And it got me to VKM and got me to a place where I thought that the real huge problem was drinking. That's all we were going to talk about.
Right.
So that was not what it was about.
It wasn't. It was your relationship with yourself that was missing. and you were trying to fill that with your children, your husband, and your job, whatever it was.
Right.
Because what we don't do, and what really causes the substance use, is because we're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
See, if you're not connected to yourself, you're in pain. You're suffering. You are. I mean, it's not anything else. The relationships seem to be the issue, but it's the lack of relationship with yourself that's causing you the pain and suffering.
Right.
How horrible to not experience yourself. How horrible to not know yourself, to be lost.
Right.
It's painful. And then your traumas on top of that are incredibly painful. But we don't know they're impacting us because we're not aware. You know, so we're suffering
this whole time.
And we use substances or other disorders, it doesn't matter.
And particularly for women, particularly for me in my situation, it was really hard and continues to be hard to distinguish codependency and just being a caring mother, a caring partner.
Right.
The family relationship, the relationship with your partner, your significant other, is so much about caring and love.
Right.
And when does that turn into codependency? You know?
If you are caring more about the people, the relationships, than you are yourself. Okay, that's the step into codependency, where they become the focus. Because as soon as you are not the focus, then you've lost yourself again.
Right.
And you're getting all your goodies by giving yourself away.
Right. And that is your focus. And suddenly you think that what your worth is what you're doing for everybody. I'm being a great mom. You know, this is my worth.
Right.
When I was drinking, I was being a horrible mom.
Right.
And they hated me.
Right.
And I hated myself.
Right.
And when I was drinking, it was mostly the drinking. So there are these little instances where I was taking them to, you know, all their different things.
Right.
You know, I was doing things for my husband.
Right.
And I just basically lost myself. Those were the times where I had value. Those were the only times where I had value.
That wasn't really value. See, that's the myth.
Right.
When we're in a role, that doesn't have value. We get lost in roles, whether we're playing daughter, mother, caretaker, worker. Those are all the roles that keep us lost because they're defining us instead of us defining us.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So we put value to the roles, and we didn't even create them. We were just put in them.
Yeah.
And we don't know who we are without the role. That's the whole point of codependency.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? It's like, how do you really find worth and value? Is by connecting to yourself. It guides you. This inner system, the mind, body, spirit connection is your safety and security. It's what has purpose. It's what has value. And if we're out there trying to find it, we're never going to find it. It's illusionary.
Right.
And delusionary.
Right. And you alluded that we don't just have this codependency with people. We can have it with a job.
Yes.
What are some of the other ways that it shows up?
Well, any of the roles. We're codependent in our families, with our kids, with ourselves, with our husband, wives.
What do you mean with ourselves?
When we are absent from ourselves.
Okay.
Okay, we're being codependent.
Gotcha.
You know, because we're not dependent on ourselves. And money is a different way. You know, prestige, power. There's so many ways we get caught in. I call it delusion. It's like it's a fog out there. We're trying to find ourselves. You know, instead of knowing, and I really believe just wholeheartedly, we are our purpose. We're the only purpose. And all the other things can enhance that. If we're looking for purpose out there, you're just going to keep looking.
Yeah.
You're not going to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, no. One of the greatest effects that doing this codependency work with you has had on me is being able to separate myself from my role as an attorney and how codependent I was with my profession, working crazy hours so that my bosses would be happy.
Right.
It was all about, the clients, what people would think about me if I wasn't an attorney, who I was if I was. And one of the things that I've been able to do, as you know, is sort of break away from that and not try to go from horrible law firm job to horrible law firm job. I'm actually trying to do something away from law, like this podcast. So that's a prime example of how you can be codependent with your profession.
Yes.
Something else, and how just being aware of it,
Yes.
to something so fundamental that I totally have shifted my focus on what I do every day.
And now you're you.
Right.
You're finding you.
Right.
Instead of identifying with a role or a profession.
Yeah.
In this culture, professions define us.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing anybody asks you? What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
That is just,
Yeah.
I could go off on that. But it's like that doesn't define us.
Mm-hmm.
We let that define us. You thought we're like the sheep.
Yep.
We're a
Totally.
flock of sheep.
Totally.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And, what I'm getting from you is that codependency is such an issue for everybody.
Everybody,
And
men and women.
I was going to ask you, we don't talk about it a lot with men. I think that's
men
unfortunate.
are so codependent.
Yeah. I wish they got exposed to more of this.
Right.
Do you do any work with men?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
I have several men in my private practice. I'm actually talking to each of them to see if they would be interested in doing a group.
Oh, nice.
Because there's not enough focus and attention for men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're lost even more than women to the extent that they don't have access. And men with men keep that access limited.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Completely.
And I want to be an impetus for men to be able to feel comfortable, and not just men running men, but a woman talking to men and offering them the soft place for them to share.
Oh, nice.
And really get to know themselves.
Yeah.
I see the yearning in them.
Mm-hmm.
I think men have a harder road, and I have great compassion for that.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me very sad.
Yeah, their role is pretty specific and
it's
pretty
limited, and how they do codependency is when you have a feeling or sharing something, they want to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
That's their go-to, or they throw money at it.
Mm-hmm.
That's their two main components.
Right.
Avoidance, being right,
That's a big one.
women are different, but they want to be right too. But with men, it's so rich and beautiful, at least in the work I do with them, that they really are yearning, just like you're yearning, like I'm yearning. They're longing to find themselves. They're lost. So anyway, that's something that I'm maybe expanding out to, because I want to offer that too. Yeah,
definitely. So you've mentioned your groups. Talk about the ways that you're bringing this message of codependency to the world, because I know that that's a big, aim of yours.
It is
to get this out there.
It is. Well, I started working obviously at Villa Kalima, and that's where I really started doing the groups the most, and really developing them and understanding the significance and how pervasive and invasive codependency is. So I started there running groups. Then I started the Wednesday night group, and that really brought it to life for me. And I feel like it's really developed into recovery from life. Not just codependency, it's recovery from life, because life is very stressful and complex. We need each other to help each other through it, to simplify it. And more than anything, I want to simplify things. We make them so complicated. and they're really not.
Mm-hmm.
So I have developed several groups, and expanded. And the cool thing is I just finished writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm excited about that. And it's rediscovering the lost self, which is what we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I have started, it's just the first book I've ever written, but like how to get it out there, how to share this that we're talking about with more people. And then it hopefully will expand, and it will expand, like the ripples in the water, because I don't know how else to do it. I'm not gonna go on television. That's not my thing. This is hard enough. Does that make sense? So
it makes perfect sense.
It's like women helping women, and men. Not to exclude men, but it's like the more we're an example, the more we are an example, and the more we do the work in recovery from life, the more we are an example for others to say, oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Because there aren't enough examples. There just isn't, Sarita. It's very sad to me.
Yeah. Well, I know for myself that my husband knows a lot more about codependency than he ever did before. And he uses it very well. Well, sometimes he's like, okay, you're being codependent. But sometimes he just has the awareness of when he's doing something that rings untrue in that way.
And it interferes with the connection. That's another way if you're interfering with your own connection to yourself, your children, your husband, whomever, that's codependency. It's really simple. It's the interference, because when you're not codependent, you're authentic, you're genuine, and you're available. Right. Which means communication. That's how I see it.
Well, that's how Janice sees it. And
all right.
Thank you so much for being here and talking. This is a really tough subject. And no, I like what you said. It's simpler than you think.
It is simple.
Yeah. So let's go to it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am divinity defined. I am the God on the inside. I am a star, a piece of it all.